The sound of someone trying to change my locks while I was inside my own home will haunt me forever. I pressed my back against the front door, my heart pounding as metal scraped against metal just inches from my face. Through the peephole, I could see the HOA president directing two security guards like he owned the place. "Sir, you need to exit the property immediately," one of them shouted through the door. My hands shook as I dialed 911. 2 weeks ago, I was just another homeowner paying my dues and following the rules. Now I was barricaded inside my own house, fighting for everything I had worked for. The eviction notice they taped to my door was completely illegal, but they did not care about the law. They wanted me gone, and they were willing to break into my home to make it happen. That is when I realized this was never about property violations. This was war. The Florida heat hit me like a wall as I stepped out of my rental car, exhausted from a 2-week business trip that had taken me across 3 states. All I wanted was to collapse on my couch and forget about conference calls and client meetings. My little suburban house looked exactly as I had left it, the lawn perfectly trimmed, the driveway clean, everything in its place. Then I saw the white paper fluttering against my front door like a surrender flag. My stomach dropped before I even read the first line. Official letterhead. Legal language, the kind of document that changes everything in an instant. Notice of eviction screamed from the top of the page in bold letters. I blinked hard, thinking the exhaustion was making me hallucinate. But the words remained, stark and threatening against the crisp white paper. The homeowner has violated multiple covenants and agreements as outlined in the Homeowners Association Charter. Failure to vacate the property within 72 hours will result in legal action and forcible removal. My hands trembled as I read the list of violations. Unauthorized lawn ornaments. I looked at my single garden gnome sitting peacefully beside my mailbox. Paint color violations. My house was the same beige color it had been when I bought it 3 years ago. Failure to maintain landscaping standards. I had literally paid a service to cut my grass the day before I left. This had to be a mistake, some kind of administrative error. I fumbled for my phone and called the HOA management company, my fingers struggling to dial the number printed at the bottom of the notice. Sunset Palms Management, this is Jennifer, how can I help you? This is about the eviction notice on my property at 1247 Maple Street. There has been some kind of mistake. Please hold while I transfer you to our legal department. The hold music was cheerful and mocking. I stood in my driveway, sweat dripping down my back, listening to instrumental versions of pop songs while my entire life hung in the balance. After 20 minutes, the call went to voicemail. I looked around the neighborhood I had called home for 3 years. Mrs. Peterson across the street was peeking through her curtains, but when she saw me looking, she quickly disappeared. The Johnsons next door, who usually waved when I pulled into my driveway, were nowhere to be seen. Something was very wrong here. The neighborhood felt different, hostile, like everyone knew something I did not. I walked around my property looking for any possible violation that could justify this insane notice. My fence was regulation height. My trash cans were stored properly. My mailbox was the approved style and color. Everything was exactly as it should be. That is when I remembered the last HOA meeting I had attended before my trip. I had stood up during the question period and asked about the missing money from the Community Improvement Fund. The president, David Martinez, had gotten defensive and angry when I pointed out that the numbers did not add up. "We will look into your concerns," he had said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. Now, 2 weeks later, I was being evicted from my own home. The timing was not a coincidence. This was retaliation, pure and simple, but proving it would be another matter entirely. I unlocked my front door and stepped inside, the cool air conditioning a relief from the oppressive heat. My house looked exactly as I had left it, peaceful and familiar, but now it felt like a fortress under siege. I spread the eviction notice on my kitchen table and stared at it under the bright, fluorescent light. 72 hours. That gave me until Friday to fight this or lose everything I had worked for. The war had begun, and I had not even known I was a soldier. Sleep was impossible. I spent the entire night at my kitchen table, surrounded by papers, laptop glowing in the darkness, diving deep into HOA law and property rights. My coffee grew cold as I read through statute after statute, discovering that the eviction notice violated nearly every regulation in the book. In Florida, HOAs cannot evict homeowners. They can place liens, they can fine, they can take you to court, but they cannot just throw you out like a renter. The notice was not just wrong, it was potentially criminal. I pulled out my property deed and compared it to the HOA covenants. The violations they listed were either completely fabricated or based on rules that did not exist in our actual governing documents. My garden gnome was not mentioned anywhere in the restrictions. The paint color was specifically approved in the architectural guidelines. At 3 in the morning, I found the smoking gun. Buried in the county records, I discovered that David Martinez, the HOA president, had been in contact with a real estate investor about properties in our neighborhood. The investor was looking to buy homes below market value for a development project. My hands shook as I printed out the email exchanges. Martinez had been feeding information about homeowners to this investor, identifying who might be vulnerable to pressure or harassment. My name was on the list, marked as potential problem due to financial oversight questions. The next morning, I called my neighbor Sarah, who had always been friendly and seemed reasonable. Her voice was nervous when she answered. "I was wondering if you had heard anything about my eviction notice," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "Oh, that?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I probably should not be telling you this, but Martinez and 2 other board members were taking pictures of your house last week. They had clipboards and were writing things down." My blood ran cold. "What kind of things?" "I do not know, but they were pointing at your mailbox and your front door. They seemed really focused on finding something wrong." "Sarah, has anyone else in the neighborhood been getting harassment from the HOA?" There was a long pause. "You did not hear this from me, but the Hendersons got 3 violation notices last month after they complained about the pool being closed without notice. The Garcias got cited for their fence height even though it is exactly the same as everyone else's. And old Mr. Wilson got a notice about his garden that made him cry." A pattern was emerging. Anyone who questioned the board, anyone who complained about their decisions, anyone who stood up for their rights was being targeted with bogus violations and harassment. I thanked Sarah and immediately started calling other neighbors. Most would not talk, but a few brave souls shared their stories. The HOA was operating like a criminal organization, using their authority to silence dissent and line their own pockets. My security camera system had been recording continuously while I was away. I pulled up the footage and found exactly what Sarah had described. 3 men in golf shirts walking around my property, pointing and taking notes. They spent 20 minutes examining my perfectly normal mailbox, looking for any excuse to cite me. But the most damning evidence came from my research into Martinez himself. Public records showed that his brother-in-law had recently started a property management company specializing in distressed sales. The same company that had been emailing about buying homes in our neighborhood. The conspiracy was bigger than I had imagined. This was not just about silencing a troublemaker. This was about forcing out homeowners so connected investors could buy properties cheap and redevelop the entire neighborhood. I printed everything: bank records showing suspicious HOA expenditures, email chains between Martinez and his brother-in-law, photos of board members trespassing on my property, county records showing the real estate investors' plans. By sunrise, I had built a case that would make any prosecutor salivate. But I was not done yet. I needed to know how deep this corruption went and how many other homeowners were being victimized. I made a list of every homeowner who had been cited in the past 6 months and cross-referenced it with HOA meeting attendance records. The correlation was perfect. Every single person who had spoken up at meetings, asked questions, or complained about board decisions had been targeted with violations. Martinez had turned our HOA into his personal kingdom, using fear and intimidation to maintain control while he and his associates profited from the chaos. But he had made one crucial mistake. He had picked the wrong person to mess with. I was not going to be quietly forced out. I was going to expose everything, and I was going to make sure he paid for every life he had damaged. The hunter had become the hunted, and Martinez had no idea what was coming for him. The community center meeting room felt like a courtroom as I walked in carrying my folder of evidence. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the faces of the 5 board members sitting behind their folding table. Martinez sat in the center, his polo shirt crisp and his expression smug. About 30 residents filled the plastic chairs, most of them looking bored or defeated. They had no idea they were about to witness a public execution. "Before we begin tonight's meeting," Martinez announced, "I need to address the presence of someone who may no longer be a homeowner in good standing." Every eye in the room turned to me. I felt my face flush with anger, but I kept my voice steady. "I have every right to be here, and I have some things the community needs to hear." Martinez's jaw tightened. "Sir, you have been served with an eviction notice. Until that matter is resolved, you cannot participate in HOA business." "That eviction notice is completely illegal, and I can prove it." I stood up and walked to the front of the room, my folder in hand. Martinez tried to wave me away, but I was already addressing the crowd. "How many of you have received violation notices in the past 6 months?" Hands slowly raised throughout the room. 8, 9, 10 people, more than I had expected. "How many of those notices were for violations that you questioned or appealed?" The same hands stayed up. A murmur ran through the room. "What you are witnessing is a systematic campaign of harassment designed to silence anyone who asks questions about how your HOA fees are being spent." Martinez shot to his feet. "This is completely inappropriate. You are disrupting an official meeting." "I am exercising my right to address this community about criminal activity." The word criminal hit the room like a thunderclap. Martinez's face went pale. I opened my folder and pulled out the first document. This is a copy of the eviction notice I received. According to Florida Statute 720.3085, HOAs cannot evict homeowners. They can fine, they can place liens, but they cannot evict. This notice violates state law. Martinez was frantically whispering to the board secretary, but I pressed on. This is an email chain between our HOA president and a real estate investor discussing below-market purchases of homes in our neighborhood. The investor specifically asks about homeowners who might be pressured into selling. Gasps echoed through the room. Martinez looked like he was going to be sick. And this is security camera footage of board members trespassing on my property while I was out of town, looking for violations to cite me with. I held up printed screenshots from the video. Martinez and two other board members were clearly visible examining my mailbox and taking notes. The violations listed in my eviction notice are either completely fabricated or based on rules that do not exist in our governing documents. My garden gnome is not prohibited. My paint color is specifically approved. My landscaping exceeds the requirements. The room erupted in angry voices. People were standing up, shouting questions, demanding answers. Martinez was trying to restore order, but his authority was crumbling by the second. This is what happens when you ask questions about missing community funds, I continued. This is what happens when you demand transparency from your elected representatives. They try to destroy your life. Mrs. Henderson stood up in the back row. They cited us for our fence height 3 times last month, the same fence that has been there for 5 years. Mr. Garcia joined in. We got a notice about our mailbox being 6 inches too close to the street. We measured it ourselves. It is exactly where it should be. The room was in chaos now. Years of suppressed anger and frustration were pouring out as residents realized they were not alone in their harassment. Martinez was pounding his gavel, his face red with rage. This meeting is adjourned. Everyone needs to leave immediately. You cannot adjourn a meeting just because you do not like what people are saying, I shot back. These people deserve answers. Security, Martinez shouted, though there was no security present. I held up my phone, the recording app clearly visible. I am documenting everything that happens here tonight. Every word, every action, every attempt to silence residents who are asking legitimate questions. Martinez stared at the phone like it was a weapon pointed at his head, which, in a way, it was. This is not over, he said, his voice low and threatening. No, I agreed. It is just beginning. The board members filed out of the room, leaving behind a crowd of angry residents who finally understood what they were up against. But they also understood that they were not powerless. The revolution had begun. Martinez did not waste time. The next morning, I found 3 new violation notices tucked under my door like poison pen letters. My garbage can was apparently 6 inches too close to the curb. My garden hose was visible from the street. My doormat was not regulation size. I took photos of everything, documenting the absurdity with clinical precision. Each ridiculous citation was more evidence of harassment and abuse of power. But Martinez was just getting started. That afternoon, a white sedan drove slowly past my house, the driver taking photos with a professional camera. The same car returned twice more before evening, each time pausing to document my property from different angles. I waved at the driver during his 3rd pass. He sped away. The psychological warfare was carefully orchestrated. Every day brought new harassment, new attempts to make me feel like I was living under surveillance. The message was clear: back down or we will make your life hell. Anonymous letters started appearing in neighbors' mailboxes. I only found out when Sarah called me, her voice shaking with anger. Someone is spreading lies about you. They sent a letter saying you are a convicted felon and that you have been harassing board members. My blood boiled. Sarah, I have never been convicted of anything, and the only harassing going on is what they are doing to me. I know, but not everyone knows you like I do. Some people are starting to believe it. The character assassination was devastating. Years of being a good neighbor, of helping people with their groceries and watching their houses while they were away, erased by anonymous lies designed to isolate me from community support. Then Martinez crossed a line that transformed this from a property dispute into a personal war. My phone rang at work. It was my boss, Karen, and she sounded confused. I got a very strange call today. Someone claiming to be from your homeowners association said you were involved in some kind of legal trouble and that it might affect your ability to travel for work. I felt the floor drop out from under me. Karen, that is completely false. I am fighting some bogus citations from my HOA, but there is no legal trouble. I figured it was nonsense, but I had to ask. Who would call and say something like that? Someone who wants to destroy my life. That night I could not sleep. I walked through my house, checking locks, closing curtains, feeling like a prisoner in my own home. The harassment was working. I was exhausted, paranoid, and starting to question whether fighting back was worth the stress. But then I remembered the faces of the other homeowners at the meeting. The relief in their eyes when they realized they were not alone. The hope that maybe, finally, someone would stand up to the bullies who had been making their lives miserable. I installed additional security cameras, covering every angle of my property. If they wanted to play surveillance games, I would make sure every second of their harassment was documented. The next morning brought a registered letter that made my hands shake. Martinez was threatening to place a lien on my property for unpaid fines totaling $8,000. Fines for violations that were either fabricated or based on rules that did not exist. I called my bank immediately. A lien could destroy my credit, make it impossible to refinance or sell my home. It was a nuclear option designed to force me into bankruptcy through legal fees and financial pressure. But Martinez had made a crucial mistake. Every action he took, every escalation, every attempt to silence me was creating a paper trail that would be devastating in court. I spent that evening organizing everything chronologically. The timeline told a clear story of retaliation and abuse of power. Any jury would see exactly what was happening. The harassment campaign was backfiring spectacularly. Instead of breaking my spirit, it was strengthening my resolve and providing me with enough evidence to bury Martinez and his corrupt board. They wanted a war. They were about to get one. I found Jennifer Walsh through an online search for attorneys who specialized in HOA disputes. Her office was in a gleaming downtown building, and her credentials were impressive. But what sold me was the fire in her eyes when I laid out the evidence. This is one of the most egregious cases of HOA abuse I have ever seen, she said, flipping through my documentation. The eviction notice alone is grounds for criminal charges. What are my options? We are going to destroy them, legally, of course. Jennifer explained that we had multiple avenues of attack: civil rights violations, harassment, abuse of power, fraud, and conspiracy. Each charge carried significant penalties, both financial and criminal. The first thing we need to do is file complaints with the state attorney general and the Real Estate Commission. What they are doing is not just wrong, it is illegal. Within days, we had submitted a comprehensive complaint package to every relevant state agency. The documentation was overwhelming. Email chains, bank records, security footage, witness statements, and a timeline that clearly showed the pattern of retaliation. But our most powerful weapon was the growing coalition of affected homeowners. Jennifer suggested we organize them into a potential class action lawsuit, which would increase our leverage and share the legal costs. I reached out to every homeowner who had been cited in the past year. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People were angry, scared, and ready to fight back. We met at the local library, away from HOA property and prying eyes. 23 homeowners showed up, each with their own story of harassment and abuse. Mrs. Peterson, the elderly woman who lived across from me, broke down crying as she described being cited for her rose garden that had been featured in the neighborhood newsletter just 2 years earlier. They said my roses were invasive species. These are the same roses my husband planted before he died. They want me to tear them out. The Garcias had been cited for their fence height 13 times, despite the fence being installed by the original developer and identical to every other fence in the neighborhood. Young couple had been fined for having a motorcycle in their driveway, even though the covenant specifically allowed motorcycles, and there were 3 other motorcycles visible from the street. Every story followed the same pattern. Legitimate homeowners living normal lives, suddenly targeted with bogus violations after they questioned the board or attended meetings. Jennifer took detailed notes on each case, her expression growing more serious with each story. This is not just harassment. This is organized criminal activity. The local news station became interested after I provided them with our documentation. The reporter, Mike Stevens, was skeptical at first, but when he saw the evidence, his journalistic instincts kicked in. This is a hell of a story. A corrupt HOA trying to force out homeowners for personal profit. Are you willing to go on camera? I agreed immediately. The more public attention this received, the more pressure would be applied to Martinez and his co-conspirators. The news segment aired on Friday night, and the response was immediate. My phone rang constantly with calls from other homeowners, other attorneys, and even a representative from the state attorney general's office. We are opening a formal investigation, the prosecutor told me. Based on your documentation, we believe there may be criminal activity involved. Meanwhile, Jennifer's legal team was conducting their own investigation. They discovered that Martinez had been operating the HOA without proper insurance, which made him personally liable for damages. They found evidence of financial mismanagement going back 3 years, and they uncovered communications between Martinez and his brother-in-law that clearly showed the conspiracy to force out homeowners. We have them cold, Jennifer told me during one of our strategy sessions. The question is not whether we can win, but how much we can make them pay. But Martinez was not going down without a fight. His attorney sent us a cease and desist letter demanding that we stop making defamatory statements about his client. He threatened to sue for damages if we continued our harassment campaign. I laughed out loud when I read it. He is accusing us of harassment. Desperate people do desperate things, Jennifer replied. This letter is actually good news. It means they know they are in trouble. The state agencies were moving faster than anyone expected. Within 2 weeks, we received notice that the Real Estate Commission was conducting an emergency review of the HOA's licensing and that the Attorney General's office was considering criminal charges. Our coalition of homeowners had grown to 37 people, representing nearly half the neighborhood. The class action lawsuit was taking shape, with damages potentially reaching into the millions. But the real victory was already happening. Martinez had stopped sending violation notices. The daily harassment had ceased. The white sedan no longer cruised past my house taking photos. The bullies had been exposed, and they were running scared. The afternoon sun was blazing when I saw them walking up my driveway. Martinez was flanked by two men in security uniforms, their faces hidden behind dark sunglasses. They moved with the confidence of people who believed they held all the power. I watched from my living room window as they approached my front door. My heart was pounding, but I was ready. The security cameras were recording everything, and my phone was already dialing 911. The doorbell rang, followed immediately by aggressive knocking. "Open the door. We are here to execute the eviction order." I pressed my face against the peephole. Martinez was holding a clipboard, trying to look official and authoritative. The two security guards looked like they would rather be anywhere else. "There is no valid eviction order," I called through the door, "and you are trespassing on my property." "Sir, you have 72 hours to vacate, and that time has expired. We are authorized to remove you from the premises." I had my phone pressed to my ear, giving the 911 operator my address and explaining the situation. "Three men are attempting to illegally evict me from my own home. The HOA has no legal authority to evict homeowners." The dispatcher's voice was calm and professional. "Units are en route. Stay inside and do not engage with them." Through the peephole, I watched Martinez gesture toward my front door. One of the security guards was shaking his head, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. The other was examining my lock, apparently considering whether to force entry. That is when I heard the sound that will haunt me forever. Metal against metal, someone inserting a key into my lock and trying to turn it. "They are trying to change my locks while I am inside," I told the dispatcher. "Officers are 2 minutes away. Continue to stay inside." I pressed my back against the door, my heart hammering in my chest. The legal abstractions of the past weeks had suddenly become visceral reality. Someone was literally trying to break into my home and throw me out. The scraping sound continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. I could hear Martinez directing the operation, his voice tight with frustration. "The locks should have been changed yesterday. We cannot wait any longer." One of the security guards was arguing with him. "Sir, this does not feel right. The man is inside his house. We cannot just break in." "We have legal authority. He is no longer a legitimate resident." "I do not see any paperwork that gives us the right to break down doors." The sound of sirens in the distance made my knees weak with relief. The cavalry was coming. I watched through the peephole as Martinez's expression changed from confidence to panic. The two security guards were backing away from the door, clearly wanting no part of what was about to happen. Two police cars pulled into my driveway, their lights flashing. 4 officers emerged, their hands resting on their weapons as they approached the 3 men standing at my door. "Police, step away from the door." I opened the door slightly, keeping the chain lock engaged. "Officers, I am the homeowner. These men are attempting to illegally evict me from my own property." The lead officer was a woman in her 40s with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen everything. "Sir, we need you to step outside so we can sort this out." "I am not leaving my home. I have done nothing wrong. Martinez was frantically pulling documents from his folder, trying to present his case to the officers. This man has been served with a legal eviction notice. He has violated multiple HOA covenants and refuses to comply with the board's authority. The female officer examined the eviction notice, her expression growing more skeptical with each line. Sir, this is not a valid eviction notice. HOAs cannot evict homeowners in Florida. What do you mean it is not valid? I mean you have no legal authority to remove this man from his home. In fact, what you are doing right now could be considered criminal trespass and attempted breaking and entering. Martinez's face went white, but he violated the covenants. That is a civil matter. You handle that through the courts, not by trying to break into someone's house. The officer's body camera was recording everything. Martinez's meltdown was being captured in high definition for posterity. This is ridiculous. I am the HOA president. I have authority over this property. Sir, you have no authority to evict anyone. And if you do not leave this property immediately, you will be arrested for trespassing. The two security guards were already walking back to their car, shaking their heads. Martinez stood alone on my driveway, his authority crumbling in real time. This is not over, he said, his voice shaking with rage. Yes, it is, the officer replied, and if you come back here, you will be arrested. The investigation moved like an avalanche once it started. The state attorney general's office opened a criminal probe into Martinez's activities, focusing on fraud, harassment, and abuse of power. The Real Estate Commission suspended the HOA's license pending a full audit of their financial records. Within 2 weeks, Martinez was forced to resign from the board. The letter he sent to homeowners was a masterpiece of deflection and self-pity, claiming he was stepping down to spend more time with family, and that his accusers were disgruntled residents with personal vendettas. Nobody believed him. The emergency election to replace the entire board was scheduled for the following month. Our coalition of affected homeowners had organized a slate of candidates committed to transparency, accountability, and actual adherence to the law. But the real victory came when the HOA's insurance company contacted me directly. They wanted to settle all claims immediately, before the criminal investigation made their liability even worse. We are prepared to offer full compensation for legal fees, damages, and additional compensation for the harassment you endured, their attorney told me over the phone. The settlement check was more than I had ever imagined. But more importantly, it came with a formal apology from the HOA and an admission that the eviction notice had been improper and illegal. Martinez was facing potential criminal charges. The brother-in-law's real estate company was under investigation for fraud. The corrupt board members were being sued personally for their roles in the harassment campaign. The new board implemented every reform we had demanded. All meetings would be recorded and streamed online. Financial records would be published monthly. Violation notices would require approval from 2 board members and would include a clear appeals process. Most importantly, they established a homeowner bill of rights that protected residents from retaliation and harassment. My story had ripple effects far beyond our small neighborhood. Other homeowners across the state began organizing against abusive HOAs. Attorneys specializing in HOA law reported a surge in clients seeking help with similar situations. The local news station won an award for their investigative reporting on HOA corruption. Mike Stevens called me personally to thank me for having the courage to come forward. Your story opened a lot of eyes. We have gotten dozens of tips about similar situations in other neighborhoods. I still live in the same house, but everything has changed. The neighborhood feels like a community again instead of a police state. People wave when they see me in the driveway. Children play in the streets without fear that someone will cite their parents for noise violations. The garden gnome still sits beside my mailbox, a tiny symbol of resistance against petty tyranny. Sometimes I catch neighbors smiling when they see it, remembering the battle that restored their rights and dignity. Justice had been served, but more than that, a community had been saved. The bullies had been exposed and defeated. The system had been reformed. And everyone learned that standing up to corruption, no matter how small, can change everything. The war was over, and we had won.